You were certain about something. A conversation that happened, something that was said, a promise that was made, and then the other person looked at you calmly and told you that you were wrong, that it didn't happen that way, that you were remembering it incorrectly, that you were being oversensitive. And slowly, not immediately, but slowly, you started to wonder if they were right. That wondering is not confusion. That wondering is the result of a deliberate and systematic process being done to your mind. It has a name. And by the end of this video, you will never mistake it for your own failing again. The word gaslighting comes from a 1944 film in which a husband systematically manipulates his wife into believing she is losing her mind. He dims the gas lights in their home and denies that the light has changed. He moves objects and insists she moved them herself. He tells her repeatedly and with complete calm that her perception of reality is wrong. She begins to believe him, not because she is weak, because the human brain is designed to update its beliefs based on new information. And when the most trusted person in your environment repeatedly provides information that contradicts your perception, your brain, functioning exactly as it should, begins to incorporate that information. Gaslighting is not a manipulation of your emotions. It is a manipulation of your epistemology, your brain's mechanism for determining what is true. That is what makes it the most psychologically destructive form of control that exists. Emotional abuse leaves you hurt. Gaslighting leaves you unable to trust the instrument you use to understand everything else. It leaves you unable to trust your own mind. In 1998, a man named Keith Raniere founded an organization in Albany, New York called NXIVM. It presented itself as a self-improvement and executive success program. It attracted thousands of members over the following 2 decades. Doctors, lawyers, actors, educated professionals from across the world. In 2019, Raniere was convicted on 7 federal charges including sex trafficking, racketeering, and forced labor. The FBI investigation and the subsequent testimonies of survivors produced one of the most extensively documented cases of systematic psychological control ever assembled. And at the center of that documentation was gaslighting, deployed not on one person but on thousands simultaneously over years. What the NXIVM case reveals about gaslighting is how it operates as a system rather than an isolated incident. Because the common understanding of gaslighting is that it happens in intimate relationships, one person manipulating one other person. What NXIVM showed is that the same mechanism operates at scale, and understanding how it operates at scale makes the intimate version far more visible. The first tool Raniere used was reality redefinition. NXIVM members were taught that their negative emotional reactions, anger, fear, sadness, doubt, were not responses to external events. They were personal deficiencies. If you felt afraid, that was your fear, not a response to something frightening. If you felt angry, that was your anger, not a response to something unjust. If you doubted what you were being told, that was your limiting belief, not evidence that something was wrong. Every emotional response that might have functioned as a warning signal was reframed as a personal failing that needed to be corrected. The alarm system was dismantled by convincing the person that the alarm was the problem. The second tool was social isolation and consensus manipulation. Gaslighting is most effective when the target has no external reference point. If everyone around you confirms the gaslighter's version of reality, your own perception becomes increasingly difficult to defend. NXIVM members were gradually separated from friends and family outside the organization. Their social world contracted to people who shared the same reality-distorting framework. When your entire social environment reflects the same distorted mirror, you stop questioning the mirror. You question yourself. The third tool was confession and collateral. Members were encouraged, and eventually required, to provide damaging personal information about themselves. Secrets, fears, past mistakes, things they were ashamed of. This information was held by the organization. It served 2 functions simultaneously. First, it created the feeling of deep trust and intimacy, the apparent vulnerability of confession. Second, it gave the organization leverage. The target had handed over the tools of their own silencing. Questioning the organization now meant risking exposure of everything they had confessed. This is the architecture of a trap that feels, from inside it, like a relationship. The fourth tool, the one that makes gaslighting complete, was incremental normalization. No single demand was outrageous. No single redefinition was obviously wrong. Each step was small enough to be accepted. Each accepted step made the next step easier to accept. Researchers who study coercive control describe this as the boiling frog phenomenon, not a metaphor about stupidity, but a precise description of how gradual change evades the threat detection system. The threat detection system responds to sudden change. It does not reliably respond to change so slow. It is imperceptible at each individual step. By the time the accumulated change becomes visible, the target is already so far inside the distorted reality that exit feels impossible. Not because the doors are locked, because they can no longer remember what was on the other side. Here is the psychological mechanism that makes all four tools work. Human beings do not experience reality directly. We experience a model of reality constructed by our brain from available information. That model is updated constantly based on feedback from our environment. It is designed to be correctable, to incorporate new information and revise its conclusions. This is a feature. It is what allows us to learn. Gaslighting exploits this feature by inserting false information into the update process through a trusted source. The brain incorporates the false information because the brain cannot distinguish between accurate feedback from a trusted source and deliberate misinformation from a trusted source. The trust is the vector. The closer the relationship, the more trusted the source. The more trusted the source, the more completely the false information is incorporated. The more completely incorporated, the more thoroughly the target's model of reality is replaced by the gaslighter's version. This is not a flaw in the target. This is the gaslighter finding the correct exploit in a system that cannot be made invulnerable, without also making it unable to trust anyone. Here is how to recognize gaslighting before the model of reality has been fully replaced. There are four signals that appear consistently in documented cases. The first signal is the persistent feeling of confusion in the presence of one specific person. Not general confusion. Specific confusion, a fogginess that appears reliably in their presence and clears when they are absent. Confusion is the subjective experience of a brain whose model of reality is being actively disrupted. If the disruption is localized to one person, that person is the source. The second signal is chronic self-doubt that began or intensified after a specific relationship started. If you were confident in your perception before this relationship, and you are no longer confident now, something in the relationship is producing that change. Healthy relationships do not systematically erode your trust in your own mind. The third signal is the consistent pattern of your emotional responses being reframed as personal failings. A partner or colleague who regularly explains your fear, anger, or doubt as evidence of your own deficiency, rather than as a response to their behavior, is dismantling your alarm system. Emotions are information. Anyone who consistently tells you your information is wrong is controlling what you are allowed to know. The fourth signal is the experience of your external reference points narrowing. If a relationship has gradually resulted in fewer outside friendships, less contact with family, less access to perspectives that differ from the relationship's framework, that narrowing is not coincidence. It is the precondition for successful reality replacement. One final thing. People who were gaslit in childhood, whose early caregivers responded to their perceptions with consistent denial or reframing, are significantly more vulnerable to gaslighting in adult relationships. Not because they are weak, but because their brain learned early that its own perceptions were unreliable, that the external authority was more trustworthy than the internal signal, that the correct response to their own experience was doubt. If you grew up in an environment where your perception was routinely overridden, you did not learn that your mind could not be trusted. You were taught it, and anything that was taught can, with time and the right support, be untaught. The most important sentence in this video is one you already knew before you clicked on it. You knew what you experienced. You knew what was said. You knew what happened. Someone worked very hard to make you forget that you knew. You were right,